season 2 of Feminism Today, everyone. I'm Sophia Johnson in New York. For decades, Zainab Salbi has connected and inspired women who persist in war-torn regions around the world. She's acted as a powerful voice for reaching and uniting women through a shared perspective. To that end, Zainab founded Women for Women International, a humanitarian organization dedicated to women's rights and assisting survivors of war, and more recently, Daughters for Earth, a campaign to raise $100 million for nature conservation, restoration, and regenerative agriculture. Zainab Salbi, welcome to Feminism Today.
It was great to be here with you.
How do people live and cope in the midst of violent conflict and environmental degradation?
Well, I believe that it's innate in us to have resilience. It's just
Mhm.
innate in humans to have resilience in us. And that after seeing so many wars and so many conflicts and so many destructions that I have witnessed in my life, in my personal life, and other women's lives worldwide, I really came to believe that people fight in different ways. Of course, there is the fighting weapons that everyone pays attention to,
Mhm.
but there's also fighting, and especially women fight with beauty,
Mm.
with love,
Mm.
with hope,
Mm.
and with dancing, with joy, and with keeping life going. And
Mm.
partially is we can't help but to keep life going, like things don't stop in conflicts.
Mhm.
Um, I always say people in wars, as someone who lived in war and worked in wars for 20 years, you know, people fall in love and get married and have happy birthday celebrations and go to school and all these normal things in life keeps on going because that's how we are wired to, right? We don't pause life. But I also think it's unique how women address that. They keep the backline discussion in the midst of conflicts going. They keep the life going, basically. And they keep it, when I'm saying with beauty, like, I really do not mean to be esoteric. They
Mhm.
really keep it with keeping their beauty, with keeping their homes beauty around, with their gardens, with keeping the birthdays going and the falling in love. They keep it with keeping that human resilience going. And every time I go to a war and I'm like this melodramatic activist, oh my God, I
Mm.
had humbled to learn that it is important to fight back not only with fierceness, but with love and with joy and with beauty. I mean, my first lesson was I was in Bosnia during the war in Sarajevo, which was this besieged. It was the Ukraine of the moment, right? That was almost 30 years ago. And I was like making it in the tunnel with the UN. It's a big adventure. And I get to Sarajevo and I was like, okay, what can I get you next time? Uh,
Mm.
Asking the woman, and they're like, lipstick. I'm like, lipstick? Who cares about lipstick,
Yeah,
And
yeah.
they said, because it's the smallest act of resilience
Mm.
that makes us feel beautiful and
Mm.
keeping beauty alive. And that we want that sniper to know he is killing a beautiful woman before he kills us.
That felt that so strongly. When did you first realize you wanted to spend your life empowering women?
Hmm. I have to give a big thanks to my mom, who I was born and raised in Iraq, in Baghdad, Iraq. And my mom is the first feminist that I honestly met before I even knew what the word feminism meant. But as a child, she made me read all kinds of books about women's liberation and what's happening to women and their oppression. She told me stories of her, of generation of women in her own family who have been oppressed in different ways.
Mm.
She made me read Roots. I was a child of Iraq at age 13. She made me read books. She like takes me to the bookstores and like saying, okay, you're gonna read this book, this book, this book. And I was a child, I read everything. And when I was 16, I remember telling her, Mama, when I grow up, I'm gonna dedicate my life to, helping women all over the world.
Mm.
And we were driving in Baghdad, Iraq. I know my country of origin is, have had such a turmoil and bad reps and all of these things, but it's nothing that's the stereotypes that is spread about it. But so my mom was driving in a highway that is a beautiful highway. It was sunset. The sky was nearly red from like a very deep sunset. And she turned to me and she said, honey, You can, you will do that. And
Mm,
that stayed with me, right? I mean, and my life took a lot of turns and trials. Honestly, I was in an arranged marriage. That's a long story. I was in an abusive marriage. I was all of that. But at age 23 or 22, even, you know, get my life back in order. And now I'm in America. Just started my life in this new country.
mhm,
I When I saw injustice against women, I don't even know who they are. It was a different country. I don't even know. It was irrelevant whether I knew them or not. What was relevant was that there were women in different countries who were going through concentration camps and rape camps. And I felt I had the obligation as a human being to do something about it. And this ultimately comes from my dedication and conviction that when we see injustice, we have got to speak and do something about it. For when we don't, and when we ignore it or avoid acknowledging it, we invariably legitimize it.
mm,
Then we allow for the corruption of our own values, right? Because we think we're good people, but what does good mean if you do not act against injustice, right? Good doesn't mean, it's not a concept that, oh, I'm doing good. You have to act on the good. And so for me, it's a very personal journey that I feel I owe it as a human being to do all I can when I can. I can't do everything about every injustice, right? But when I can, what I can, and show up in all the ways I know how to show up to do something about it. And having had that story of with my mom, who is no longer with us when I was 16, who
mm.
believed in me and said, yes, honey, you can, made all the difference in my psyche, honestly. And it made me, I think, not question my ability to move forward, not doubt myself because my mother said you can.
I love that. It's so beautiful. And as a parent myself, I feel that so strongly. Just the strategies your mother implemented in terms of encouraging you to read and explore not only your story, but stories of others around the world. Is something that I think will stay with me. So thank you for sharing that. Now,
Mm.
what I also hear coming through is this idea of resilience. Resilience was something that you had to figure out and early on. I read that as a child, you witnessed and experienced, as you've spoken about here, the Iran Iraq War in the 1980s, the memories of which you described in your TED Talks, which I listened to and I was completely moved by. Do you think of yourself as a resilient person?
You know, it's not that anybody taught me what resilience meant, right? Like I didn't know these concepts. Frankly, I didn't even read or study about them. I mean, now I do.
Yeah.
Now I'm into self-work and self-development and understand what does it mean. But it's not, it didn't come with a framework for me. It just came from the simple idea that I was living in a dictatorship and close to a dictator. And I saw wrongs in front of my eyes. And
Yeah.
I was not oblivious into these wrongs. I
Mm,
was clear that these wrongs were wrongs. And I couldn't do anything about it because to do something about it would have killed my family and endangered loved ones.
yeah.
And so then I came to America and this country as an immigrant, at that time, you know, you feel, and still I feel that ability to freedom of expression, right? There's a lot of issues here, but there's still that freedom of expression, which believe me, I had none growing up, right? So
Mm,
when you feel like it's almost when you don't have anything and then you are given that thing, you have a deeper appreciation of it, right? So you take advantage of that freedom, basically. But I didn't learn resilience, or I think it is innate in all of us. I honestly believe it's wired in all of us. I think at one point when people go through an injustices in different kinds,
mhm,
at one point, this may be controversial even, I'm not sure,
mm,
we have a choice. Do I stay in my victimhood or do I change and take over and take control over my life?
mm,
Right?
mm,
And I stayed in my victimhood for a while.
mm.
And then I expressed, I rebelled against it by having, mobilizing hundreds of thousands of women through Women for International.
Mhm,
And then at one point, I needed to heal from that you know,
Yeah.
and my anger. And, as I wrote in my last book, freedom is an inside job, right? And I went through that transformation. But your core question, am I a resilient person? I hope so.
Mm.
But it's not a tactics that one does. It's like choices we make in life. Do I
Sure.
make that story define me, or do I define my story? Do I make that pain define me and become my identity, or I become my identity that is more based on my truth and not on what happened to me?
Mm.
I think that we all have that tools in us. I really do, and whether we activate the tools or not is then a choice. But that tools is innate in being human.
You've spent decades rising above. And you just mentioned the fact that you really had to sort of do some internal work to heal. And that came out in your recent book. Let's talk a little bit about not necessarily, that difficult space, the Women for Women International, how that came to being and what that meant for you and why that was important in its from its inception.
Well, as I told you, the inception of Women for Women is I saw justices in other wars, and I grew up in the same context, but couldn't do anything about it. So I acted, right? And I didn't have any money. So I said, what can I do? Because, it's like, I was demonstrating for a long time until at one point, frankly speaking, I was like, this demonstration is just not working. I need to do something practical for
Yeah.
the people who are suffering there. So I came up with this idea that enables me to be contributing, which is based on $30 a month to help one woman at a time, basically stand on her feet. And what that happens is that it made it, I really believe that philanthropy should not be a term that is only for the rich. Philanthropy is a term all of us could be philanthropists. It should not have a hierarchy to it. I give $30 a month. I'm a philanthropist. And I have like park rangers and bank clerks and all women and yes, millionaires and all of these things. But everyone, we're equal in how much we give, not how much we give, of how much we can give of ourselves, right? So
Mhm.
that's the conception of Women for Women. But over time, it taught, I learned that I'm mobilizing for women. I'm here telling them to speak their truth, to break the silence, because the silence, when we keep silence, when abuse happens to us, we become part of the secret and sort of
Wow.
enable it to happen over and over again.
Mhm.
I was like, Sophia, I was like marching in Congo and in Rwanda, and I was like, break your silence. But I had not broken my silence,
Wow.
up until then. And I believed in women's independence. I still believe independence, but I had not, like, my financial security was not secure. So I was advocating for what I did not have in myself,
Mhm.
until one day I caught that discrepancy. I caught the discrepancy between my advocacy and my own life. Am I telling my full truth? Am
Yeah.
I having independence? Am I free in myself? I'm asking other women to do that, but am I doing what I'm asking them for?
Yeah.
And when I discovered I wasn't always, uh, that's when I went into the self discovery. It's like, oh my God, either I leave, I can't advocate for something I am not consistent in. So I have my choice. Either I do what I'm asking them to do and break
Mm.
my truth and speak the truth and be my truth and find my independence and find my freedom, or I walk out because I'm not in alignment right now, right?
Mm. Mm.
Because of that. And that's the scariest thing of my life. And to be honest, what it taught me the most is humility. Because
Mm.
it's really easy for us to go and shout and demonstrate and lecture, and all of these things is much harder to truly live in the alignment with every value that we're advocating for. Much harder. It requires sacrifice, it requires hard work, it
Yeah.
requires tears, it requires vulnerability. And if I would describe myself anything, I would say the courage to move forward into myself, the courage to take my journey into my heart.
Mm.
That requires courage. It requires awareness. I am going to work on this. And in order to live in alignment with myself. And what came out of it is
Mm.
understanding my dark, understanding my shadow and my light, understanding, how do I live in alignment, adjusting my life accordingly, sacrificing aspects of my life accordingly, but at least I am living in my truth. So I don't know if I answered your question or not, but I think, with so many advocates going on in the world, it's really, it helped me even in how I advocate. I became more compassionate in my advocacy.
Mhm,
I
mhm.
became more compassionate to those others that I can't stand, because I understood that this is really hard to make that change in my life.
Right.
So I hope I answered your question.
You
That's
did answer my question, but it inspired in me another question that I didn't necessarily have written down here. But what I'm curious about is, in light of, I don't want to draw you into a national debate, but the abortion rights conflict, and how do women grapple with this? How do we deal with this desire for freedom, for rights, the right to choose? Um, how should women contend? How do you think women should contend with this issue in this time, in this country?
I mean, what's happening in this country is scary and is heartbreaking. And it makes me, as many feminists as you, I'm sure, fierce with saying, we're not giving back, right? We're not giving up. We will, as to quote one Afghan woman in her, when there was a Taliban takeover a few months ago, she said, I will fight back by my mere existence, by
Huh.
mere voice. I will make it uncomfortable for you to keep what you're doing, basically. And I would say, I always would quote her, we will fight back by our mere existence, by our own voice, and by our perseverance. And, and, right?
Hmm.
I can only share with you what I have learned. And I'm not necessarily saying, I honestly am not, because I haven't put a thought into that, right?
Right.
Into the abortion, of how we fight abortion. But I can share with you examples that I learned from different countries on different subjects. And I'm going to give you, so forgive me. So, but for example, I worked on female genital mutilation, cutting, circumcision, different names, different articulations, right?
Yeah.
The one that moved forward the most, came from a woman who was a very humble woman in a small town in Egypt, who was adamant,
Hmm.
adamant about her daughters not going through the tradition, right?
Yeah.
And she had like no access to feminist lectures or workings or any of that, right? She didn't. But what she did, she was like, she just finished elementary school. What she did is her sex life was miserable because she was mutilated, right?
Hmm.
And she was having a hard time in her marriage as a result. So then she's like, this doesn't make sense. She goes to the library. Yes, she gets a literature on why this is happening to her, what's going on. Now she educate herself about the process and what goes on. And then she became perhaps one of the most influential activists on the issue. But she led it from a very practical experience in her,
Hmm.
right? It wasn't educated language, it wasn't phrases, it was like, I went through that. It destroyed me. It
Hmm.
destroyed my marriage, and over my dead body, I am not going to let my daughters go through that. This is, by the way, easy for you and I to say that. In her community, there was an uproar against her, by school, by the elders, by her in-laws, everyone, and this woman fought and succeeded. Now,
Hmm.
why I mentioned that, there is, for me, I'm always about, how do we go into our hearts to, there is a political fight, which we have to fight it, right? There is a legal fight, which we have to fight it. There is the activist fight, we have to fight it. And there is the heart transformation. How do we bring people along with us in the journey? And that includes on our own showing of vulnerability, of our pain, of making it real, and of making it tangible. And when the shift becomes from only head-on strategy, head-led strategy, to a heart-led strategy, I
Hmm.
think, in my experience, and I'm not saying I think we will do this, we will happen. In my experience, that's in every subject, whether it is discrimination against me as a Muslim brown woman, or whether it is what I just told. When I shift my strategy into a heart language, what I call, I
Hmm.
find more effect and more alliance with even people that I could not stand for having horrible views and attitude about what I'm fighting against.
I mean, that makes sense. It's powerful, it resonates, and it completely makes sense, especially in the political climate we find ourselves. Just the idea of compromise, just the idea of empathy, really, right? It's all about thinking about, what the other person might be thinking and experiencing, to find some way to commune with across the aisles or, whatever.
Which
Let's,
we do need to. I mean, we really need to. And we need to, it's not an ideological thing. Oh, this is we need to, because it's not, I don't call it compromise, honestly. It is finding a language that
hmm,
can connect to that other person's heart,
hmm,
and tangible, like here, right?
yeah,
And
yeah,
tangible life. And from that language, going about the transformation, we find a common path of dialogue, at least. So I'm not going to compromise. I have the right, and all women have the right for abortion. That's period. End of question for me. How can I bring more people around with, right? That's for me is, and so not make it about, make it about how do we create a path where I can hear you and you can hear me,
yeah.
because I'm convinced when we hear each other from our hearts, I really, really, really am convinced, not all the time, maybe 50% of the time, maybe 60% of the time, but transformation happens at a different rate and a better rate. Public knowledge is that women are going to be impacted the most by climate changes. Actually, they are being impacted the most right now as we speak. Displacement, food scarcity, etc. Right? So we all know that. Okay, here we go. Women are victims again. We also know that part of the solutions for climate change is not some, you know, technology jargon that I don't know how to say, like I feel like in Star Trek episode, where like, some technology that is like extract carbon, all of that. It's a lot. The best technology we need to make change in climate change and make it now and immediate in the coming 20 years for us to be saved is actually protecting 50% of Earth, meaning leaving it alone,
Right?
meaning let it refurbish itself. I mean, I think it's common sense. And, like when I'm sick, I need to sleep so I can recover. That's basic common sense, right?
Right, right.
Apparently Earth acts the same way, and so, okay, then we discovered women are taking the lead in these things because they're being displaced, so they're actually taking leaderships in protecting the earth, right? That means regenerative agriculture as well, but it really means putting 50% of it, protecting it from any extractions of mineral, diamonds, whatever it is, from corporate extractions, right? So women are taking the lead, but they're nowhere to be heard, not in the story, not in financing. Women get 2 cents out of every dollar
Mhm,
that goes to climate solutions, right?
mhm.
And that's honestly, that's the feminist in me. That's the warrior in me, like,
Yeah,
and my partners, all because this was not one person doing it. I assure you that this was a group of women pulling this together and saying, we need to change that story.
right.
So we are to mobilize $100 million to put more money in the hands of women on the front lines who are fighting to protect the earth. And they're doing that from different ways, but that includes regenerative agriculture. But in a nutshell, they are really fighting to protect 50% of earth. They exist, they're everywhere, they're doing amazing work, and they're not being acknowledged or seen or funded. We're here to change that story. We're using our networks, the networks of women, which is nothing is more powerful. I am a witness to that, than when a group of women get their acts together, mobilize and get the job done. This is what Daughters for Earth is: a group of women getting their act together, finding all these group of women in all over the world, put more money into their hands and get the job done, because the other group of people have not done it yet.
Yeah,
And the cause is integrated. They're not separated. They're all together.
yeah.
I finally got what Gandhi said: be the change you want to make in the world. I
Um,
really finally got it. Oh my God, it means I need to learn to love and respect and be kind to myself
yeah,
in order to actually be the change I want to make in the world.
yeah, yeah. I love this. You've done a lot of things. You've traveled to a lot of places. You've written a lot of books at this point. What is activism and advocacy in the era of violent conflict and environmental degradation?
Oh, yeah, 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 yeah. That's a very, very good question. You know, you know, activism is, it is about speaking up against injustice, right? But here's where I am in my life right now. There's a room for all kinds of activism. There's a room for the anger. There's a room for the demonstration.
Mm.
There's a room for the rage. There's a room for all the things that we need to do to make a roar where the world can hear us. And it is integrated in us. And we've got the only way to break out of that is to go back to our hearts, listen to our heart's language, find our own leadership models, and go and step out of it and demonstrate what we want in the world, not only demonstrate against what we are against of. I hope I answered your question.
You answered my question beautifully. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you, Zainab Salbi. Thank you so much for joining us this week.
It is my honor, my absolute honor. Thank you for your work and for all you stand for. I appreciate it. Thank you.
And that's it for our program today. Remember, you can follow me and the show on Instagram or Twitter. Thank you so much for watching Feminism Today on Free Speech TV. Join us again next week.